I had consumed poison before. Not in the crude, human sense of the word. Not powders slipped into goblets by trembling hands. Poison, to my kind, was a concept far broader than chemistry. It could be information delivered at the wrong moment. A phrase spoken too early. A truth arriving without permission. This, however, appeared, at first, to be none of those things. The dish was placed before me with ceremonial precision. 12 attendants moved as one, their steps rehearsed across generations, their breathing synchronized by training and fear. The silver-veined platter hovered a finger's breadth above the obsidian table, sustained by a gravity field tuned to my personal signature. Steam rose in pale threads fragrant with the spices of Cartel Prime, conquered 3 centuries ago, its people long since reduced to cultural memory and culinary tribute. The hall watched. They always did. 37,000 beings occupied the Queen's Hall that day, arranged by hierarchy, species, and political risk. The ceiling arched so high it vanished into controlled shadow, an artificial night designed to remind all present of the scale of the empire. Light descended only where it was needed, on the banners of conquered systems, on the ranks of armored delegates, and inevitably on me. Queen Esrith of the Continuum Throne. Devourer of Oaths. Arbiter of Extinction. Titles accumulated like sediment over time. None were inaccurate, though all were incomplete. I inclined my head slightly. The hall stilled further, if such a thing were possible. My physiology registered the shift immediately, heart rates spiking among lesser species, pheromonal emissions from the insectal delegates on the eastern tiers, a measurable drop in oxygen consumption as thousands unconsciously held their breath. The meal was symbolic. It always was. Consumption, to my people, was never merely nourishment. It was declaration. To eat was to accept. To accept was to dominate. This dish, prepared from the bioengineered flora of a rebellious border system, was meant to mark the end of negotiations. Once I consumed it, their resistance would be formally over. Their fate would follow. I raised my primary hand. The attendants froze, locked in reverent paralysis. The first bite required no haste. Ritual demanded patience. That was when the human stepped forward. He should not have been able to. No clearance marker flared in my peripheral vision. No security alert echoed through the neural lattice beneath the hall. The sentinel constructs, ancient machines older than several star systems, did not move. Every protocol designed to prevent exactly this moment failed in silence. The human crossed the threshold line. I noticed him not because he was loud, but because he was not. Humans, in my experience, were rarely quiet in the ways that mattered. Even when silent, their minds broadcast chaos, fear, hope, defiance, desperation, all competing signals. This one did not. His neural signature was disciplined, contained, almost trained. A pattern I associated with high-function operatives or those who had already accepted death. He stopped 3 paces from the obsidian table. Gasps rippled through the hall like a shockwave through liquid. Delegates recoiled. Translators struggled to recalibrate. A minor prince from the relaxed dominion fainted outright. I did not move. Curiosity, like fear, is an indulgence for lesser rulers. But observation is survival. I allowed the moment to stretch, not out of mercy, but calculation. He was smaller than my guards. Softer than my generals. Wrapped in fabric rather than armor. No visible weapons. His eyes were dark, unfocused, not on me, but on the dish. Then he spoke. "Don't eat that food." The words were plain. No flourish. No appeal to mercy or justice. Not even a tremor. The hall collapsed into silence so complete that even the environmental system seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether sound was still permitted. I felt it then. Not fear. Interruption. Something had fractured the ritual. A thread pulled loose from a tapestry woven over centuries. The dish before me had not changed. My attendants remained frozen. Yet the future, once certain, now branched into unstable probabilities. My internal systems accelerated analysis. Toxins? Unlikely. Every molecule had been scanned, simulated, tested across thousands of virtual queens. Political manipulation? Possible, but inefficient. A human warning carried no formal weight within imperial law. And yet, the human's presence itself was the anomaly. "Identify yourself," I said at last. My voice did not echo. It did not need to. It propagated directly into the auditory centers of every being present, translated flawlessly across languages and neural architectures. Authority encoded in frequency and rhythm. The human did not bow. That alone would have justified his execution. "My name won't matter if you eat that," he replied. A murmur began, quickly suppressed by the sentinel constructs, who finally stirred, uncertain, as if waking from a long dream. I studied him more closely now. Age markers suggested midlife by human standards. Scars along the hands, old, healed, practical. His posture was neither submissive nor defiant, but aligned, as if he stood before a storm he had already measured. "You are aware," I said, "that interrupting a queen's consumption is punishable by immediate dissolution." "I'm aware," he said. "I'm also aware that your people don't die the way mine do." An odd statement. Not incorrect, merely incomplete. The dish steamed gently between us. Time stretched. I could have ended him with a thought. Ordered the sentinels to reduce him to base particles. Continued the ritual. The Empire would not have questioned it. Humans, after all, were expendable. Useful, occasionally clever, but ultimately brief. And yet I did not raise my hand. Instead, I asked, "Explain." A single word. Dangerous in its generosity. The human inhaled, slowly. I detected elevated cortisol, but controlled. He was afraid, of course, but fear was not guiding him. Something else was. "That food isn't meant to kill you," he said. "It's meant to teach you something. And once you learn it, you won't be able to unlearn it." A ripple of confusion spread across the hall. Even my advisors, linked directly to my cognitive core, registered uncertainty. Knowledge as poison. That metaphor was not unknown to my kind. Entire civilizations had collapsed after learning truths they were not structured to survive. "You presume much," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why I had to be the one to say it. No one else here could." He glanced around the hall then, at the ranks of bowed heads, armored backs, trembling delegates. "They're all invested in you eating it," he continued. "For different reasons. Fear. Power. Tradition. None of them can afford for you to stop." "And you can?" I asked. A pause. "I can't afford for you not to." Something shifted within me then. Not emotion, something older. A strategic dissonance. The recognition of an unmodeled variable. The hall remained silent. The dish cooled, fractionally. For the first time in 300 cycles, I did not know whether the next motion of my hand would preserve the Empire, or fracture it. And that uncertainty, more than any toxin, stayed my appetite. Silence is not emptiness. In the Queen's Hall, it was pressure. It pressed against bone, against thought, against the unspoken contracts that held the continuum together. My hand remained suspended above the dish, muscles locked in perfect stillness. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared ceremonial. To those who understood power, it was an alarm without a sound. No queen pauses without consequence. I became acutely aware of the advisors threaded into my consciousness, 13 minds, each cultivated from different species, epochs, and philosophies. They did not speak in words. They never did. They communicated in probability gradients, in cascading risk assessments, in subtle shifts of emphasis. Terminate the human. Delay the ritual. Investigate anomaly. Maintain dominance display. The suggestions overlapped, conflicted, dissolved into one another. None achieved consensus. That, too, was rare. "You have interrupted a final act," I said, my gaze never leaving the human. "Even if your warning is sincere, damage has already been done." "I know," he replied. "That's why I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just asked you to stop. Asked? The word tasted strange. No one asked queens for anything. They pleaded. They negotiated. They threatened, if they were foolish. Asking implied the possibility of refusal, and the dignity of choice. It was a linguistic maneuver, subtle but intentional. Step closer, I commanded. Gasps returned, sharper this time. The sentinel constructs shifted fully now, their black geometries unfolding like predatory flowers. A single miscalculation and the human would be erased before completing a step. He moved anyway. 2 paces closer, until he stood at the edge of the obsidian table. I could smell him now, iron, carbon, the faint chemical signature of stress hormones. Human biology was inefficient, loud. And yet there was something else beneath it, something cultivated. You are not a civilian, I said. No, he agreed. Nor an ambassador. No. Then you are either a weapon or a message. He considered this. Both if I've done my job right. Interesting. I gestured, a minute adjustment of my fingers. The dish retracted slightly, floating back from my immediate reach. The attendants exhaled as one, though none dared move. Across the hall, banners shimmered as environmental fields compensated for a sudden rise in microturbulence. Stress made architectural. Explain the lesson, I said. Carefully. The human's eyes finally met mine. Many had failed that test. Predators look for dominance or submission in a gaze. I offer neither. Only attention. The food contains a neurocatalyst, he began, tailored to your species' unique relationship with memory. My internal system surged, running parallel analyses at impossible speed. Neurocatalyst, yes, faint traces had been noted, dismissed as ceremonial enhancement. My people often infused meals with compounds that sharpened recall, heightened ancestral communion. This one doesn't enhance, he continued. It aligns. Aligns with what? I asked. With us. A dangerous word in the Queen's Hall. He went on before I could respond. Humans process memory linearly. You don't. You carry history as a living architecture. When you consume something, you don't just remember its origin, you integrate its perspective. That was true. It was how we ruled. To consume was to understand, to subsume, to render opposition obsolete by absorbing its context. This catalyst forces cross-species empathy, he said. Not symbolically. Neurologically. The advisors within me recoiled. Empathy was not forbidden, but it was regulated, controlled, strategic. Unfiltered empathy was destabilizing. Entire subspecies had gone extinct after overexposure to foreign mind. You are suggesting, I said slowly, that this dish would cause me to experience the conquered system as they did. Yes, he said. In real time. With your full cognitive capacity. The hall trembled, just slightly. Structural dampeners activated automatically. And what? I asked. Would that achieve? He hesitated. That was new. Change, he said finally. Not mercy. Not surrender. Change. Change was the most dangerous outcome of all. The continuum was not cruel. It was optimized. Billions lived under its order because alternatives had failed. Rebellions were inefficient. Freedom, unmanaged, was entropy wearing a romantic mask. If your aim is to weaken the empire, I said, you have chosen a poor method. I'm not trying to weaken it, he replied. I'm trying to stop it from collapsing. That drew my full attention. Explain. You've consumed hundreds of cultures, he said. Thousands of perspectives. But always filtered, sanitized, stripped of contradiction. You understand them, but only as systems. Not as lived experiences. And this distinction matters? I asked. It does when the system you're running starts encountering variables it was never designed to process, he said. Like us. Humans again. I allowed myself a fraction of introspection. The last century had been difficult. Not militarily. Humans lost wars efficiently. But they adapted. They resisted assimilation not with weapons, but with ideas that refused to stabilize. Belief systems that mutated faster than we could model. Values that contradicted themselves and still functioned. You fear that if I consume this dish, I said, I will feel what they felt. Yes. And that this feeling will alter my decisions. Yes. Then why stop me? I asked. If your goal is change, is this not the most direct path? His jaw tightened. Because it won't stop there, he said. Once your kind experiences unfiltered human memory, you won't just understand us. You'll mirror us. Doubt. Regret. Moral recursion. You'll hesitate. I tilted my head. As I am doing now. He met that without flinching. Exactly. The advisors surged again, this time divided. Hesitation in a queen was contagious. Already, probability trees were fracturing. Border systems would sense it. Rivals would exploit it. Order relied on inevitability. And what? I asked. Do you propose instead? The human exhaled, slowly. Relief, or resolve. Talk to us, he said. Without eating us. A crude phrasing, but effective. For cycles, you've studied humanity by dissecting outcomes, he continued. Wars, treaties, collapses. But you've never let a human explain themselves to you without fear of extinction as a subtext. Why would I? I asked. Fear clarifies truth. No, he said softly. Fear simplifies it. That sentence lodged somewhere deep. I considered execution again. It would be clean. Restorative. The ritual could resume, perhaps after minor adjustments. History would smooth over the anomaly. But history, I was beginning to suspect, was already changing. What is your designation? I asked. The hall leaned inward metaphorically. Names carried weight. Elias Ward, he said. Formerly of the Human Continuity Project. Formerly. A project that no longer existed, or was never meant to be acknowledged. Your life, I said, is forfeit by every statute of this empire. I know, he said. But your future doesn't have to be. I withdrew my hand completely from the table. The dish hovered, unattended, cooling into irrelevance. Remove the food, I commanded. The attendants moved for the first time since his interruption, their training barely containing the shock encoded into their muscles. Across the hall, something irreversible happened. Hope. Not loud. Not declared. But present, like a hairline fracture in stone. I looked at the human one last time before the sentinels escorted him into containment rather than oblivion. You have delayed the inevitable, I said. He shook his head. No, Your Majesty. I've complicated it. As he was taken away, I realized something unsettling. For the first time in my reign, the next move was not obvious. And worse. I was curious to see what would happen next. Containment is a word designed to reassure those who are not inside it. The chamber they brought Elias Ward to was not a cell. Cells implied punishment. This space was an instrument, an interrogation environment optimized to unmake certainty. No sharp edges. No darkness. No pain. Only absence. Absence of time cues, of temperature drift, of anything the human brain used to anchor itself to continuity. I watched through 12 layers of perception. Not directly. A queen is never directly present where vulnerability is cultivated. I observed through analytic avatars, emotional simulators, and probabilistic mirrors that predicted his responses before he completed them. His posture adjusted. His breathing slowed. His mind searched for threat and found none, an outcome more disturbing than danger. He is stabilizing, noted one advisor, its cognition tinged with unease. Subject should be deteriorating. Humans deteriorate poorly when ignored, another replied. They interpret it as opportunity. I dismissed both without response. Instead, I replayed the moment again. Don't eat that food. Not shouted. Not pleaded. spoken as a certainty. As if the future after my consumption was already known to him, and undesirable. That implication mattered. Begin cognitive interface, I ordered. The chamber's fields shifted. Elias stiffened, not in fear, but recognition. His pupils dilated. His neural activity spiked, then reorganized into disciplined coherence. You told me you wouldn't torture me, he said calmly. I did not, I replied, my voice entering his mind without sound. I chose not to. A pause. Fair, he said. I allowed a fragment of my presence to manifest, a silhouette of light and shadow, humanoid enough to be understood, alien enough to be undeniable. Humans required metaphor. Truth overwhelmed them otherwise. You warned me of a lesson I could not unlearn, I said. Yet you now submit yourself to the same risk. I've lived with it for years, he replied. You don't forget once you've seen it. You just decide what kind of person you are afterward. Person. Such a fragile unit of identity. What did you see? I asked. The chamber hesitated. My systems registered the anomaly, a deliberate delay coded into the interface by him. Not resistance. Preparation. I saw you, he said. Incorrect. You have never seen me, I replied. I've seen the version of you that exists in every conquered world, he said. The part that survives after you leave. That was closer. He continued carefully now. The Human Continuity Project wasn't about weapons. It was about exposure. We embedded ourselves, voluntarily, in systems you absorbed. Colonies. Tributary worlds. Even some you considered culturally insignificant. I accessed records at once. There were gaps. Statistically improbable gaps. You hid, I said. We listened, he corrected. And we recorded what happened after assimilation. I felt something cold trace the edges of my cognition. What happened? I demanded. The same thing, he said. Every time. At first, prosperity. Stability. Then stagnation, not economically, not technologically, but existentially. Art flattened. Language simplified. Decision-making centralized around what you would approve. Order, I said. Yes, he agreed. But brittle order. The kind that works until it meets something unpredictable. Such as humans. Such as grief, he said quietly. Such as contradiction. Such as love without utility. That word again. Love. Humans used it like a universal solvent, applying it to concepts it could not structurally support. You assume your experiences are universal, I said. They are not. No, he replied. But your reactions to them are. I increased pressure on the interface, subtle, precise. His memories surfaced unbidden now. Not extracted. Offered. I saw a human city beneath a red sky. Children playing in the shadow of a continuum spire. Their laughter muted, disciplined. I saw a poet editing his words not for truth, but for compliance. A general hesitating, not because he doubted the order, but because he feared disappointing an unseen queen. I terminated the feed. The chamber reset. Elias gasped once, steadying himself. You didn't want to see more, he said. I saw enough, I replied. Enough to recognize a pattern I had never named. You engineered the dish, I said. Yes, he admitted. With others. Scientists, linguists, defectors from your own client species. Treason, I said. Survival, he countered. We didn't design it to hurt you. We designed it to force honesty. And if I had eaten it, I asked, what then? You would have understood us perfectly, he said. And that understanding would have broken something essential in how you rule. Silence returned, not the pressured silence of the hall, but something internal. Why warn me? I asked at last. Why not let me eat? Because the moment you did, he said, you would no longer be able to pretend that what you do is inevitable. I considered that. The continuum throne was built on inevitability. On the certainty that resistance was temporary, that assimilation was merciful, that extinction was a failure state we minimized. What you call poison, he continued, we call conscience. An imprecise translation, but serviceable. You believe, I said, that by sparing me this knowledge, you preserve my capacity to rule. No, he said. By sparing you, we preserve your capacity to choose. Choice again. Humans were obsessed with it, despite evidence that choice caused them more suffering than peace. And what, I asked, does humanity choose when unafraid? He smiled then, not in triumph, but sadness. We argue, he said. Endlessly. We fail. We hurt each other. But sometimes we change our minds. That admission carried more weight than defiance ever could. I withdrew my presence from the chamber. The interface disengaged. Elias slumped, exhausted but intact. As I returned to the Queen's Hall, advisors erupted into motion. Strategic forecasts updated. Military contingencies recalculated. Already, word of the paused ritual had spread beyond the chamber. Systems watched. Rivals waited. Recommendation, an advisor urged. Terminate the human resume ritual. Reassert inevitability. Another countered. Delay has altered baseline. Termination may escalate instability. I raised my hand. They fell silent. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not optimized, but negotiated. Prepare a communique, I ordered. To all tributary systems. Shock rippled through the lattice. Content? An advisor asked. I considered the words carefully. Words mattered now. Inform them, I said, that the Queen will listen. Across the Empire, alarms would sound, not of war, but of uncertainty. And somewhere deep within the continuum, something ancient and rigid began, imperceptibly, to bend. Listening is inefficient. That was the first conclusion my advisors reached after the communique was transmitted. Inefficient in time. Inefficient in resource allocation. Inefficient in predictability. The continuum had been engineered to minimize variance, and listening, to billions of divergent voices, introduced variance as a primary variable. And yet, the response was immediate. Not unified. Not grateful. But immediate. From border systems long silent out of fear, messages arrived cautiously, encoded in outdated protocols as if uncertain whether modern channels were safe. From core worlds, confusion masqueraded as outrage. From conquered species whose languages we had catalogued but never truly learned, there came something else entirely: stories. Not demands. Stories. I received them as compressed data at first, then insisted they be rendered without filtration. No summaries. No optimization. Raw transmission, translated but unedited. My advisors protested. I overruled them. A farmer describing how continuum climate regulation saved his world and erased its seasons. A historian explaining how peace had frozen their culture in a permanent present. A child asking whether the Queen dreamed, and if so, what she dreamed about. That one lingered longer than it should have. The Empire did not fracture. That surprised many, including my rivals, who had positioned fleets in anticipation of weakness. They watched, waiting for disorder that did not arrive. Instead, something subtler occurred. The inevitability bent. Systems delayed rebellions they had planned for generations, uncertain now how to oppose a ruler who asked questions. Governors hesitated before issuing decrees, aware that justification might be requested. Even the sentinel constructs, machines of absolute obedience, registered a measurable increase in response latency, as if awaiting intent rather than command. Elias Ward remained in containment, by choice as much as by order. He declined offers of elevation, protection, even release. You're safer if I stay ordinary, he told my envoys. Symbols don't survive contact with power. A very human belief. I visited him once more, this time without avatars, without pressure fields, without spectacle. I allowed my presence to be as close to truth as his nervous system could withstand. You have destabilized an empire, I told him. No, he replied. You did that yourself. I just interrupted lunch. I almost corrected him. Almost. The dish has been destroyed, I said. He nodded, unsurprised. It was always a blunt tool. And yet, I continued, you risked everything to prevent me from consuming it. Yes. Why? He took longer to answer this time. Because if change came from chemistry, he said, you'd never trust it. You'd always wonder which thoughts were yours. A precise observation. No, he went on. Whatever happens next, you own it. Ownership. Responsibility. Concepts my kind understood structurally, but not personally. You will be remembered as a traitor, I said. He smiled faintly. I already am. By half my species. And as a catalyst, I added. That's usually how it works, he said. I released him that day. Quietly. No announcement. No reward. He returned to humanity not as a hero, but as a man with knowledge few would believe. The continuum adapted. Not quickly. Not cleanly. But genuinely. Assimilation protocols were revised. Cultural consumption became cultural exchange. Not equal, never equal, but no longer silent. Worlds were allowed to refuse certain integrations. Some failed because of it. Others thrived in unexpected ways. And I, Queen Esrith of the Continuum Throne, did not eat that food. Instead, I learned to hunger differently. Not for control without friction. Not for understanding without consequence. But for a future in which inevitability was no longer my greatest weapon. It was my greatest restraint. Empires, I learned, do not fall when they hesitate. They fall when they refuse to. And in the quiet that followed the loudest pause of my reign, I finally understood the most dangerous lesson of all. That ruling without ever being changed is simply another form of blindness.